I want to start off this morning by mentioning that VW Beetles are funny little cars. Anybody in here ever own an old VW Beetle? A few of us? Well, if you're one of those people that owned a VW, then you've probably had one of the common experiences that VW owners usually have. You've definitely, at least once in your life, been stranded by the side of the road. You've probably had to hang your head out the window when your wipers stopped working. And you've probably had your leg hairs singed off when you turned the heater on. That sound familiar to anybody? Some of us. Another experience you probably had with those is that you've probably had one stolen, because they're very easy to steal. They're very easy to break into the locks, but honestly, if you couldn't find a way into the car, you could just get a buddy or two and just pick it up and carry it away. Well, in 1974, a guy named Joseph McDonald was a college student. He went out to dinner with some friends. When he came back out, his 1965 VW Beetle was gone. Like most first cars, Joseph was sad and he really missed that thing. Anybody in here remember your first car fondly and miss it? Yeah, I miss mine too. It was a great 1990 Toyota pickup. That was my first vehicle. Classy. He told his daughter about his bug and she said, man, I really wish you still had that car, Dad. And he said, me too, because I loved that car. Well, in 2014, Joseph got a call that his car had been found. The car was being shipped to Canada on its way to Finland to be restored, and when they processed it, the VIN number came back as stolen. And wouldn't you know it, Joseph still had the pink slip sitting in his drawer 40 years later. 40 years. Now, I see a couple of lessons in that story. First of all, there's a reason why men hang on to useless junk for years and years and years, right? I knew I'd get somebody on my side with that one. The second thing that I see there is that some things in life aren't fair. And the third thing is that sometimes those things will correct themselves even if it takes 40 years to do it. Well, today we're going to see all of these things in the life of Paul, except maybe the hoarding the pink slip thing, but everything else we're going to see in the message. If you're following along with your sermon notes this morning, today's message is called Trials and Testimonies. We're going to be in Acts chapter 21, going all the way through Acts chapter 26. So yes, we have a lot of ground to cover this morning, and we're going to read every single verse. No, we're not really doing that. We're going to keep it quick. But if this is your first time here, or you forgot where we were in the series, or you just need a refresher, I'm going to give you a quick recap as to where we are in this series. All right? We're learning about a man named Paul. Paul used to be a Pharisee who hated Christians, but he was called by Jesus miraculously, and his life turned around. He then started ministering to the Jews that had been like him, but he faced a lot of resistance, and so he ended up going to the Gentiles, people who were not Jewish. And so he did a lot of local work in Jerusalem and in Antioch as a local, evangelist, but he also took 3 missionary journeys. The first one, I have a map up here for you to keep things fancy. The first was that he went around the Mediterranean, he went down to Cyprus, and then on up and around to Derbe, and then looped his way back. That was his first missionary journey. In the second missionary journey, he went with Silas and he met people like Timothy and Luke and Lydia and Aquila and Priscilla. This time, the route went over land, and he went to some of the same churches that he had seen before, but then he kept going on up through Macedonia, and then down through Athens, and then down into Corinth, okay? And that's where we left off last week. He was in Corinth. He had planted a church there, and he served for 1.5 years at that church. And then after this, Paul goes on to the city of Ephesus for a little while, and then he goes home. All right? Well, today we're going to look at his third and final missionary journey, where he goes back to Ephesus, and he works there for 2 years. And he stirs up a lot of trouble because he causes this huge riot in Ephesus, because in Ephesus they worship the goddess Artemis. Not huge fans of Jesus, caused a lot of problems. All right? So we actually covered this story a while back in a message called Destiny's Child. It was part of our series called Family Values in 2021. So we're not going to cover that part of the story. But what we are going to do is we're going to look at this next part of the map, where he works his way back up to Macedonia and then Greece, and he works his way all the way back across to the coast in Jerusalem. All right? So Paul gets to Jerusalem. He meets with the church. He's a Jew, right? Because early Christianity, there was no distinction between Christians and Jews as far as Christians were concerned. This is just a continuing process of what God is doing through the Jews. This isn't like a new thing. It's just a continuation. Now, the Jews at the time would have disagreed. They would have said this is new and wrong. But Christians are like, no, we're still living as Jews. This is what God is showing us, okay? So he's getting ready to go to the temple, just like any Jew would. He does a 7-day purification process. And then we see this. If you turn to Acts chapter 21, verses 27 through 31, you'll see this. When the 7 days were almost completed, the Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him, crying out, "Men of Israel, help! This is the man who is teaching everyone everywhere against the people and the law in this place. Moreover, he even brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled the holy place." For they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian with him in the city, and they supposed that Paul had brought him into the temple. Then all the city was stirred up, and the people ran together. They seized Paul, dragged him out of the temple, and at once the gates were shut. And as they were seeking to kill him, word came to the tribune of the cohort that all Jerusalem was in confusion. Okay, so what's going on here? Paul gets into trouble. He just walks into the temple, right? He's just doing his normal thing. And all of a sudden, all these people start accusing him of stuff, right? He's going to be put on trial because, well, what did he do wrong? They said that he was teaching against God's law, which is not true, right? Jesus is a continuation of God's law. He's not against it. Jesus was the fulfillment of the law, okay? And then he's accused of bringing Gentiles into the temple, which also isn't true. People saw him hanging out with a Gentile and assumed that he did that, so they charged him with this. So this mob gets stirred up, and they start beating the snot out of Paul. And then they're trying to kill him. And they drag him outside. And then, of course, these Roman officials hear about it. And the Roman soldiers walk up to get things under control. And the people that are beating up Paul do that thing like you used to see on cartoons, where they like stand him up and brush him off like, hey, you're all right. Hey, nothing going on, nothing to see here. Right? You guys know what I'm talking about? See, that's what they start doing with Paul. Cleaning him up. Oh, no, we weren't beating him up or anything. Nothing illegal to see here. Well, here's what I see going on in this situation, church. If you're filling in your blanks, here's your first one. Right actions can provoke wrong reactions. If you've ever played hockey, like I know some of us have, you've probably seen a bad penalty called a few times. There are some of you sitting in this room that I have seen call bad penalties before. Some guy goes sprawling out on the ice because he can't skate, right? You're just playing the puck, the ref blows the whistle, 2 minutes tripping right there. And what's the first thing you say to the ref? I didn't do anything. Right? I didn't do anything. But have you ever seen, if any of you watch any sports at all, you ever see a ref like make a call and then just cancel it because you argued with him? Usually doesn't happen, right? Refs, okay, we're not going to shoot free throws, never mind, right? You ever see like when a baseball manager gets ejected? You ever see him come back to the game? No, you don't. You ever watch that on YouTube, by the way, just like watching managers get ejected in Major League Baseball? That's like one of my favorite pastimes. How many times in soccer does someone actually get hurt when they're rolling around on the ground and grabbing their leg? Right? Never. It's never real. They roll around, the ref calls something, and then they get up and jog back like everything's fine, right? Because it doesn't matter. Once the call has been called, you've made up your mind, you got to roll with it, right? It's unfair. It's unjust. But you know what else it is? It's also part of the game. You just got to deal with it. Actually, in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 12, that's kind of what this says about living the life of a Christian. It says, "Indeed, all who desire to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted." You will be persecuted if you try to do the right thing and follow God. That's what you get to look forward to. Now, that doesn't mean that every time we face pushback that we're being mistreated. I have to warn you about that. Sometimes you do face pushback because the other person is a jerk, but sometimes you face pushback because you're a jerk. There is a difference there, right? So we need to always be checking ourselves to make sure that we're honoring God before we start crying out for justice. Right? This isn't unfair, I'm a victim. No, you're the jerk here, dude. Right? We have to check ourselves constantly. But if you are truly serving the Lord the right way, you're probably going to experience some injustice in this world. It's unavoidable. But that doesn't mean that it's now okay for you to start doing the wrong thing yourself. You keep serving the Lord. Let me show you a reason why. So the Jewish people here, they're trying to kill Paul, right? The Romans who are ruling over the Jews arrest Paul to figure out what's going on, and the crowd gets so crazy that the soldiers literally have to pick him up and carry him out in order to get him out of there, okay? The soldiers don't even know what's going on. The scriptures actually tell us they thought he was an Egyptian assassin with an army of 4,000 guys. I don't know where the 4,000 guys were that they thought he was with, but they thought he was the assassin, so they were getting him out of there so they could try him. Well, here's what happens next. All right, let's go to Acts 21:39. It says, Paul replied, I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no obscure city. I beg you to permit me to speak to the people. And when he had given him permission, Paul, standing on the steps, motioned with his hand to the people. And when there was a great hush, he addressed them in the Hebrew language, saying, brothers and fathers, hear the defense that now I make before you. And then he does. So Paul says, hey, stop, put me down, let me try to talk to them. Let me try to reason with the crowd. And so he speaks to them in their native Hebrew language, right? And he gives the testimony right there. And when he gives his testimony, he talks about how Jesus changed his life. He talks about how he used to persecute the church and how he was on the team that was that martyred Stephen. He talks about how Jesus appeared to him on the road to Damascus and blinded him. And then Ananias heard from the Lord and healed him. And then he says that Jesus called him to share the gospel with people, which is all fine. They have no problem with any of this up to this point. But then he says something, and it just ticks all the Jews off. In Acts 22:21, it says, and he said to me, go, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles. Up to this word they listened to him. Then they raised their voices and said, away with such a fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live. So this was the thing that set him off, right? Hey, I did all this good stuff. God's been working in my life, all these miracles. It's great. And then he told me to go to the Gentiles. What? Kill him. It's like, you think God loves the Gentiles? That's like the worst thing you could say to them, in their opinion. But to the Romans who have arrested him, who are Gentiles, by the way, they don't understand the problem. To Jews, they're used to being isolated, God's chosen people, God's favorites. But the Romans are like, we don't even know who you're talking about, right? So what the Romans decide to do is like, hey, you know what? Let's just whip this guy, Paul, and then maybe he'll tell us why they're so mad at him. Now, this situation seems bad. Has anybody in here ever been in a situation where someone's trying to get the truth out of you so they whip you? That doesn't sound like a good time, right? So this seems bad, but there's something I don't want you to miss here, because there is something good also. Here's your next fill in the blank, church. Every trial is an opportunity to share your story. Every trial is an opportunity to share your story. Paul only got to speak to the crowd here because of this chaotic mess, right? Had everything been peaceful, he wouldn't get to talk to everybody. So if we face difficulties in our life, we automatically assume that it's bad, right? If something is hard in my life, something must be wrong. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's good for you to go through a trial, because adversity gets people's attention. People can argue against your theology or your philosophy or your rationalizations, but when Christ makes a difference in your life, they can't deny that part of it, right? No one can look at Paul and say he's the same guy that he was before he followed Jesus. If you take away the forensic evidence for Christ, the reliability of Scripture, the archaeological corroboration, you take all that stuff off the plate and tell me there's no God, in that case, I might doubt God in a moment of weakness. Except that Jesus changed my life, and that I cannot deny. I can't deny that. I know it, I lived it, and I wouldn't want anything else. So then when you take that archaeology and the scriptures and apologetics and you put that all back in, it makes it that much harder for me to doubt that God is real. See, people see a comfortable faith and they think, okay, cool. But they see a faith in the midst of struggle and they say, wow, there's something real there. It's not that we need to go looking for trouble, but when trouble comes, our faith should be the thing that works us through it. So what's Paul going to do now that the crowd is getting even more angry? Well, Paul questions the Roman soldiers. He says, hey, wait a second. Are you guys allowed to whip Roman citizens by birth? And they're like, oh, shoot, you're a Roman? See, Paul had rights that basically, if you were a Roman citizen, you couldn't whip a citizen who wasn't convicted. If you did, it could cost you very expensive fines. It could cost your job. It could give you prison time, or it could even cost your life. So the soldiers are now scared of Paul, right? So now they owe him a fair shake. Okay, now we're going to listen to what you say because we're about this close to getting in trouble. So then they call down the Jewish council to ask him, why are you so mad at this guy? And so, remember, Rome doesn't want to just destroy everyone. Rome wants to control everyone, okay? Now, Paul's a smart dude, and this council is made up of Pharisees and Sadducees, and they have a core disagreement, okay? Pharisees believed that people would all be resurrected someday, which they were right about, but the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection. So Paul being surrounded by this Jewish council now, stands up and says, hey, I'm a Pharisee. The whole reason I'm on trial is because of the resurrection. Which makes them just start fighting each other, right? Like a police academy movie. They're just punching it out now and screaming and yelling and getting angry because he said, hey, I'm a Pharisee. This is because of the resurrection. Let's see how that plays out. Flip over to Acts 23, verses 9 and 10. It says, then a great clamor arose, and some of the scribes and Pharisees' party stood up and contended sharply. We find nothing wrong with this man. What if a spirit or an angel spoke to him? And when the dissension became violent, the tribune, afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take them away from among them by force and bring them into the barracks. So the council, they're punching each other, right? All these people yelling and trying to kill each other now because they're talking about theology. Nothing will make you want to kill someone like talking about theology, I guess, right? And so Paul is then taken out of the chaos. So his strategy kind of worked, right? Paul was on trial, and now he's out of it. Except that doesn't really fix everything because now the Jews just make a plan to assassinate him, which sounds like a problem, right? Ever had anybody try to assassinate you before? Right? It makes the whipping thing look easy. But this is how humans tend to work, right? Think about our society. Someone says something we don't like, we try to embarrass them. If we push harder, we try to throw them in prison. If that doesn't work, we just kill them. That's how we want to do things sometimes. That's human nature. I mean, human nature is just to kill people. How many generations did it take before murder entered humanity? It was the second generation, church. So these 40 men make an oath that they're not going to eat anything until they kill Paul to stop him from sharing the gospel. That's pretty serious. So then it must be time for Paul to give up, right? Obviously, God's not with him. Obviously, he's going to lose. Nothing good can come out of this, right? So Paul should just give up. Well, actually, it's not bad at all because this is actually God's plan. So Jesus appears to Paul and he says, hey, don't worry about all this. I'm setting this up because I am going to take you to Rome. All this is actually happening so Paul can go to Rome because he has work to do there. So Paul's nephew hears of the plot, and then here's what happens in Acts 23, verses 23 and 24. Then he called 2 of the centurions and said, get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go as far as Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. Also provide mounts for Paul to ride and bring him safely to Felix the governor. Wow. So look at this. Paul just walked into Jerusalem yesterday so that he could go to the temple. That's all he was doing. He didn't have any major plans, right? He didn't pack an extra bag. He just went to the temple, and now he's on his way, riding on this steed, surrounded by soldiers escorting him to the governor. That's a huge turnaround in Paul's life, right? Was any of this Paul's plan? No. But it was God's plan. Here's what I see there, church. Your next fill in the blank. God is working even when we can't see it. Usually we only understand what God is doing when we look back on our life, right? Like I didn't understand why God took away all of our financial provision in California when we were there. I didn't understand why our season in North Carolina was so hard. I didn't understand why God was working to make me a senior pastor when I feel like I would have been better at 100 other things. I sure didn't understand why he would ever make me live in Illinois. But now, looking back, it's quite the opposite. God did all those things because he wanted me to serve here. That's what he wanted to do. All of the teaching and the testing and all that stuff led me to where he wanted me all along. And that's not special for me. God does the same thing for all of his children. When you're facing a challenge, the Bible says he does it to shape us into something better because we are his children. For Paul, he's being tried right now so that he can stand before this guy Felix, who's the governor. And there he's accused of starting a revolution. And Paul just rolls his eyes and he's like, dude, I was only there for 12 days. Ask any one of the Roman authorities. There is no evidence I tried to start any type of riot. There's zero evidence of this. And then he says this in Acts 24, verse 14. But this I confess to you, that according to the way is what they called Christianity back then. According to the way, which they call a sect, I worship the God of our fathers, believing everything laid down by the law, and written by the prophets, having a hope in God, which these men themselves accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the just and the unjust. So I always take pains to have a clear conscience towards both God and man. And then if you jump down to verse 21, he says, other than this one thing that I cried out while standing among them, it is with respect to the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you this day. So Paul's talking to the governor, and he's sharing the gospel with him, right? But Felix is concerned with something else. He doesn't want to hear the gospel. He's a politician. Do politicians want anything holy? You got to wonder, right? Like many politicians do, what the governor does has nothing to do with right and wrong. Felix leaves Paul to rot in prison, hoping that Paul will pay him a bribe so he can let him go. That's what Felix wants. He wants money. And Paul sits there waiting for 2 years. He's sitting in prison waiting for 2 years because he's not going to pay a bribe. And then a new governor comes in. His name is Festus. He takes over, and he also doesn't care about right and wrong. He just wants to keep all the Jews that are angry at Paul happy so they won't have any more uprisings. So he keeps Paul in prison as a favor to them so that they'll like him. Imagine sitting in prison for years knowing you did nothing wrong, waiting for the Lord because some politician wants to make your enemies happy. Well, when Paul is finally seen, Festus is like, man, I don't know what to do with you. I'm just going to send you back to Jerusalem and let them try you. And Paul's got to be thinking, dude, come on. No one knows what to do with him. No one knows what to do with Paul. Keep him here, keep him there. The Jews say he's bad. I don't see anything wrong with him. He's a Roman citizen. I'm stuck. I don't know what to do with this guy. All because there's one glowing problem that none of them can get around, and that's your next fill in the blank. Integrity gives credibility. Integrity gives credibility. Paul has integrity. He's telling the truth. He's done nothing wrong, and he's just not cowering and giving in to pay bribes. So nobody knows what to do with him because they don't know how to handle somebody who's actually a pretty decent guy. This whole time, Paul's testimony is the same. I've been trying to please God. I keep a good conscience among all men, and I do admit to sharing the gospel, but if you think I'm wrong about the gospel, show me in the scriptures where I'm wrong. There's zero evidence for anything they accuse me of, and I'm just waiting on someone to do the right thing and let me go. And every time they just shove him under the rug, they beat him, they imprison him, or they send him somewhere else, or they try to kill him. And none of that stuff works because he has integrity. Proverbs 10:9 tells us, whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but he who makes his ways crooked will be found out. These people are doing everything they can to tear Paul down. But the consistency of his character and his relationship with God is too much for them. And at this moment, Paul is getting close to the edge yet again, because I don't know if you put this together. They want to send him back to the Jews. Guess who's waiting for him with the Jews? Remember those 40 guys that said that they weren't going to eat until they killed him? It's been 2 years. They're probably hungry by now, right? They really want to kill Paul by now, okay? So what can Paul do? He's cornered. What's he going to do? Well, if we turn to Acts 25:10, we'll see. But Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you yourself know very well. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. Wow. So Paul says, no, you know I've done nothing wrong. This is a Roman problem now, not a Jewish one. And if you're going to try to get rid of me, he says, I appeal to Caesar. Now, if you don't know what that means, in the first century, a Roman citizen could appeal to Caesar. What that means is you want to go to the highest authority in Rome. Take me to the top then. Take this trial higher. You guys are a bunch of, this monkey trial or whatever it's called, right? I don't want to have any part of this anymore. Take me to the top dog. I want him to try me. Okay. Now, we don't know all the details of how this legal procedure worked, but it seems kind of like the idea of like if one of our court cases went up to the Supreme Court, it would probably be something like that, right? He's like, no, I want to talk to Caesar. He's not actually going to talk to Caesar, but he's going to go to Rome to be heard by the highest authority, okay? But before he goes, he's still sitting there, and this guy, King Agrippa, comes along. Right? The king is just kind of touring around, going to different governmental stuff, and he walks in, and he's like, oh, you got this weird guy, Paul, who keeps preaching this weird stuff. Let me meet him. I want to talk to this guy. And then we get to the crux of where we're going this morning. All right, Acts 26:22. Let's see how this conversation goes. To this day, I have had the help that comes from God, and so I stand here testifying both to small and great, saying nothing but what the prophets and Moses said would come to pass, that the Christ must suffer, and that by being the first to rise from the dead, he would proclaim light both to our people and to the Gentiles. So I don't know if you put this together, but God literally just made a way for the gospel to be declared at the highest levels of the Roman government. That's what God pulled off with this. And look at Paul's testimony. He says, this is God doing this, not me. He says that the gospel I am sharing is consistent with what God has always said throughout history. And he says that this was supposed to happen, that Jesus was going to suffer and die, that he would rise from the dead. And this message is for the Jewish people, but it's also for the Gentiles, which is who he's talking to. Both Festus and Agrippa then have to make a decision like we all do. When you hear about Christ, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to respond when you hear the good news that Christ died for your sin? Well, Festus, he responds to Paul. He says, you're crazy. He doesn't want anything to do with it. And then Paul says, no, I'm actually very sane, and you know it because none of this has been a secret. You know what's been going on around here. And then Agrippa steps in and he says, man, you think you're going to convert me right now after one short conversation? And then Paul says this in Acts 26:29. He says, whether short or long, I would to God that not only you, but all who hear me this day might become such as I am, except for the chains. He has one goal, that everyone would find the redeeming grace of Jesus Christ the same way that he did, although he hopes they don't have to go to prison for it. Because Paul understands one very important truth. Here's your last fill in the blank, church. Your testimony is about Jesus, not you. So this story is not about victory over a court case. This is about victory over death. The goal was not for insurrection, it's for resurrection. This isn't about Paul, it's about Jesus. In church, that is my goal this morning too. Look, later on we get to have a potluck, and I love fellowship. I love hot dogs and sitting under the trees when it's not, melting outside. But at the center of everything we do as a body, Jesus is at the core. He's at the center of everything we do. And in a little while, we're going to see some folks that actually get to declare their faith in Christ through the act of baptism outside. And also, we're going to have some parents who are going to be dedicating their children to the Lord in just a few minutes. All right? But first, what I want to do is I want to give you guys your influence challenge for the week. If you don't know what that is, our vision here at our church is that we encourage people to connect with the body of Christ, to grow in the Lord, to serve other people, and then to influence the world. Okay? And so what we do at the end of the message is I give you an encouragement of a way where you can influence the world. I give you some homework. All right? So here's your homework. Sharing your testimony is a powerful thing that all of us should do. But you have to know how to do it, okay? A lot of us have never even taken the time to think through what our own testimony actually even is. I can't tell you how many people I've asked to give a testimony and they're like, well, I don't feel good enough. I don't feel like my story's interesting enough. I've never killed anyone in a drunk driving accident. I've never been arrested for dealing drugs. But you know what? That doesn't matter because your testimony isn't actually about you. It's about what the Lord has done for you and in you, okay? And so basically, here's the challenge for you this week. Practice giving your testimony. Write it down. Do it in front of a mirror. Do it in the car. Practice with a real person. But here's the important detail about this. Make sure you know how to give your testimony in 2 minutes. Make sure you know how to give it in 5 minutes. And make sure you know how to give it in 20 minutes. That way, whatever the audience is that you're facing that you need to deal with, you'll know how to give your testimony.